The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum holds a significant collection of items associated with the 1960s Apollo 11 program, which resulted in humankind's first successful moon landing. Preservation and disaster management pose long-term challenges to the future of this collection, necessitating ongoing research, planning, funding, and custodianship. Discussed here are organizational approaches to preservation, the requirement for innovative funding models, preparedness for the effects of climate change, and policy addressing potential terrorism events. These preservation and disaster management concerns each play an essential role in safeguarding the Apollo 11 collection. It was once thought that items such as spacesuits were made of such technologically advanced materials, that they were virtually indestructible, and therefore, preservation would not be required. Observation of deterioration in the Apollo period spacesuits has changed this, and altered the trajectory of how special collections are stored and preserved. Preservation of primary sources such as these is an emerging field, with best practice evolving in response to ongoing research. Issues of concern in the preservation of special collections include curation, storage, and public access. Climate control, environmental humidity, and engaging in emerging research are key challenges to understanding the complexities of the collection as it grows. Collaboration with other specialist fields assists in the ongoing management and preservation of materials. Collaborative partnerships are also developed in response to other specialist needs, such as the digitization of collection items. The Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center is purpose-built and provides environmental control systems and sufficient space for the Apollo collection. This includes laboratory facilities for conservators and visiting scientists to ensure the ongoing care and preservation of the collection. Dedicated collection conservation policies have also been developed to further support these goals. In some instances, access to unstable materials will need to be restricted, to safeguard items. The development of infrastructure and policies such as this are vital, to ensure that this valuable collection is preserved in perpetuity. In 2015, the Air and Space Museum launched a crowdfunding campaign named Reboot the Suit, aimed at securing funding to preserve Neil Armstrong's Apollo 11 spacesuit. Over the years, spacesuits held by the Smithsonian had begun to degrade in an unexpected way. The unique materials used in the suit's creation required preservationists to create and master new techniques for preservation. With the funds raised by the campaign and advances in conservation technology, it is now easier for conservators to monitor and maintain the condition of the suits. Crowdfunding has been utilized by other GLAM sector organizations to finance restoration and preservation programs, enabling collections to remain viable and museums to expand their collections. It is also a creative way to invest in new technology, research, and techniques that would not be available otherwise. Worldwide, organizations have been quick to utilize this strategy. In 2015, the Royal Navy Museum in London used crowdfunding to fund conservation of an historic vessel, whilst the Queensland Abbey Museum also recently employed crowdfunding to support the preservation of their stained glass window collection. In Washington, D.C., where much of the collection is held, climate change poses a direct threat to the National Air and Space Museum's collections. An increasingly hot, wet climate and projected sea level rises create risks to the collection both in terms of environmental deterioration and catastrophic flood events. Cultural institutions around the world are facing similar challenges related to the increasing frequency of climate-related extreme weather events. The Louvre in Paris was recently battered by severe storms that damaged irreplaceable works of art, whilst floods pose an existential risk to Venice, threatening to drown the city's many museums, galleries, and heritage sites. Partly in response to threats posed by climate change, and partly in response to the 2010 and 2011 disasters that impacted air and space collections, in 2016 the Smithsonian formed the Preparedness and Response in Collections Emergencies Team, PRICE. PRICE works to support Smithsonian collecting units in preparing for and responding to emergencies by providing policy development, training, and logistical support. This responds to a growing need for organizations and governments to integrate an understanding of climate change into disaster management strategies. Cultural institutions in the 21st century face potential threats from terrorist attacks and need to consider this threat when developing disaster management strategies. The iconic, high-profile nature of the Smithsonian in general, and the Apollo 11 collection specifically, make it a particularly attractive target. There is a genuine need for the Smithsonian to evaluate this risk and integrate planning of their response to such emergencies in their disaster management strategy. Disaster planning is expensive, requiring ongoing expenditure on equipment, training, infrastructure maintenance, and the development of related documentation. Whilst the Smithsonian has a number of independent sources of revenue generation, it is, to a large extent, still dependent on federal government funding. Unfortunately, this funding is on the decline, with a 13.37% reduction between 2015 and 2018, with further cuts proposed by the Trump administration. The Smithsonian may have to re-strategize to prepare for a future with diminished government revenue. It is essential that custodians of the Apollo collection respond to preservation and disaster management challenges. The issues described in this presentation represent only a few of the many considerations that must be taken into account to ensure the ongoing viability of this collection. In the face of unique preservation challenges, climate change, potential terrorism and an uncertain funding environment, a proactive approach is vital for the Smithsonian. Efforts in research, planning, and ensuring the best possible care of unique Apollo 11 artifacts, going forward, will decrease the likelihood and severity of threats posed by deterioration and disaster.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown.